Okay, so now we have to watch our P's and Q's. But the one I made on Saturday, I actually showed that again, so hopefully that will help. The let's see where my paper is here. Here we go. All right, so basically, this is my paper, so I'm sorry to have to use myself as an example, but I don't have anything else. But this is what the title page looks like on most papers. And of course, you fill in the different details. MLA is the one that has the little 3 lines at the top left corner. Don't use that. That is a MLA convention. But if you have anything pretty much over a page, I would encourage you to do a title page, move all your bio information here, don't have it anywhere else in the paper, okay? The other thing is to include page numbering, and that's easily done here. If you go up to insert and go over to page number and go, if you want to put it at the top right, which is the standard place to put it, you would pick this, and then and then you go in and, like I did Smith here, instead of page 1. And if you don't want a page number on your title page, you click this little box that says different first page. Okay, and when you do that, then it will leave the first page blank. I've screwed it up now, so I won't save it, but this should go away. And so you start page 2 with page 2, right? Other things to notice about writing the paper: you start on line 1. Don't have a bunch of blank space anywhere in the paper. There's no reason for that. Indent the first sentence of every paragraph. This is your introductory paragraph. It should be at max about a half page long. Be sure you include in that. Grab your reader in the first sentence or two, because remember, you've got about 20 seconds to get their attention. So you want to really say, this is what I'm writing about in the first sentence or two, but don't go more than half a page. This is a 17-page paper, and I still didn't go but a half page. Then you can use headers. They should be centered in Turabian and bolded. This also kind of helps you from having to have transitions between paragraphs sometimes. So this will help with your outlining. So here's your second one, and it can go, you can have several paragraphs under each one. Last time we talked about the footnoting, so you can see what that looks like. These are Times New Roman 10 point, and the footnotes, you have to manually change those to 10, not 12. Okay, single spaced. The whole first line, including your footnote numbers, indented 1 tab, and then you've got a space between each entry. This is one talking about, Esther was talking about the ancient documents. This is a primary document here, which is a letter, and this was how you would document a letter in a footnote. Now remember that I mentioned this in the video, remember that footnotes, the author's name is first name, last name, and it's more commas. So pay attention to the punctuation. If you want to look up how to do it, be sure. And then when you get to the bibliography page, it will be the opposite. That'll be last name, first name, and you will put those in alphabetical order by the last name. And those of you that hopefully I've convinced some of you to use Grammarly. This is your little Grammarly coach here. It tells you how many errors or possible changes could be made. When you click on that, it takes you to the first one, and you either accept or dismiss and move on through those. As you can tell, this was not an edited copy of my paper, so it's quite a lot of them. But when you work through that, once I have worked through Grammarly and my review function in Word, which takes you to editor, if you go through both of those, your paper pretty much will be without any errors. So I do that quite often. Okay. Try to stay away from block quotes like this. In a long paper, I can get away with a couple, but they're always single spaced and they're indented. And of course, they're always in quotes, and you'll have to tell where the quote came from. But that's what it looks like. This is page 11 and 12. And then this is where my bibliography starts. It's page 16. Primary sources should be first. They'll be in alphabetical order, and then your secondary. What constitutes a primary source? This is something that most people get wrong.
It's like an original, written or created by the subject that you're speaking about, I guess.
Right. The Journals of Columbus would be original document. Any, the Book of the Dead in Egypt, any kind of thing like that. The histories written by the Romans. So all of those would be primary documents. And if you need to figure out how to cite those, you can. This paper had almost 3 pages of sources. And then these are additional readings. Here, one other thing, everything that you include in the bibliography, you should get thrown out. Sorry, I got thrown out. But you should have a footnote for every source that you use on that back page. Okay, any questions?
So last week we talked about primary sources for Norse since they didn't actually have written language.
Yes.
And you said you talked about finding accounts of people who may have been present when they raided their city or something to that effect.
Right.
Would still be considered a primary source.
Yes.
So can I share my screen real quick?
Sure. Let me see if I can allow you to do that without getting thrown out here.
Maybe.
Hold on a second. Let me find the right share screen. Here we go. All right, now. Okay.
I just kind of want to see if this is along the lines of what you're talking about.
Okay.
So, like this one is from the Annals of Saint Burton talking about.
Yes, this is perfect. Exactly what you need, the kind of material you need. Yes.
Okay, so I'm on the right track with this.
Yes. Now, if you use different pieces of this, you'll have one source from that. Okay.
Right.
You just do different pages. Oh yeah, it looks like you've got some great stuff.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, just because that was a little different than what would normally be a source.
Yeah.
So I just kind of wanted to see if make sure I was on the right track.
And if you don't have all the pieces you need for the source, you can always just put ND, like no date or whatever, if it's missing.
Okay.
That'll work fine.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
I tell you what, I spend a lot of time doing that bibliography first before I start writing. And that way, when you start writing and you need to do a footnote, you can just take your bibliography source and put it in, and then reverse the name and change the punctuation. And you've already got all that done. So it really takes, it takes a lot of time to do things like that.
Yeah, finding my sources and getting all my references in is always what takes me the longest in any paper, whether I'm doing it for this or psychology or whatever.
Right, and writing your introduction's another thing. Some people advocate doing the introduction last. Sometimes if I don't have any inspiration for the introduction, I'll just start writing. I write mine kind of piecemeal anyway. I'll write one section or another section, just depending on what I'm reading and what strikes my fancy. I'll do that, and then come back and weave them all together into one narrative, which is good. Okay, guys, anything else about papers? Brittany, how are you doing? Are you there?
So I did have a question.
Okay.
So when I originally picked the the Mayans and the Incas and the Aztecs,
Okay.
I was confused about, the primary versus the secondary sources, because a lot of the information like I found wasn't like really firsthand.
Well, you're probably going to have to go back to the conquistadors and the priests that travel with them and the things they wrote down.
Okay.
We really don't have a good look at the perspective of the Native Americans, but they tell us what they thought they believed. There was a huge language. There's no language barrier. I mean, there's no language between them, honestly. I teach a Southwestern history class, and that was the problem with the other Native Americans, was that they didn't speak any language. And so they went by sign language, they went by just what they used their lens to look at those people, and this gave you a European perspective of what they were doing. And in your writing, you probably need to note that there are no written things. Now, there are artifacts, and you can use those artifacts and then use somebody's evaluation of them. The artifacts themselves would be primary. The commentary on them would be secondary. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. I got it.
Okay, anyone else?
No, I'm pretty good on my stuff, I believe.
Okay, good. So let's segue then to our history itself and talk a little bit about that, and I'll let you guys go.
I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Okay.
So some of the stuff I'm finding researching, like I said, especially for the Norse, there was a lot of sagas that were, originally the oral sagas that were passed down of their history and their mythology. So a translation of one of those sagas, would that be a primary source or a secondary source?
Technically, it's both. Whatever thing we have is a translation. Nothing, the books from Rome were in Latin, so we have to, once you translate them into English, you lose something. There's always a loss involved in translating, but they would count as a primary source. Just indicate in your source that these are primary somehow with a date or whatever.
Okay.
Use the original date and say translated in blah, 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 by blah, 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 whatever. And you can do that. That would be fine.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about the history we're talking about. Anything jump out at you this week or last week that you want to mention? One thing I will say about the hunter-gatherer thing, last week we talked about the tests they had done, or the research they've done with the Aborigines and the hunter-gatherers, get away from that idea that they spent 7 days, 24 hours a day looking for food, because that wasn't the case. And when they moved to sedentary agriculture, the labor became more intense, because I don't know if you've ever lived on a farm, but if you live on a farm, there's never a free minute to do anything. You've always got something to do. So as far as the labor was concerned, the move was much more labor intensive. And it did take years for them to get enough crops going to make huge differences in the workforce. They still continue to hunt meat for food. So it was a both and, not an either or thing. And I think that was the point that from some discussion boards, I kind of got, well, it was just this nice, neat little transition. We move to become farmers and live happily ever after. It wasn't like that at all. It was a both and kind of thing, and it was a transition. So what about you guys? What jumped out at you, or what would you like to question or talk about?
I think I just enjoy reading about the Cyrus and when they conquered so much land, and looking at the maps, I couldn't even imagine like how much land they had compared to Mesopotamia.
Oh yeah, and places like Genghis Khan, and when we get to that, you're talking about vast swaths of the country, and that was still around as late as World War I, when the Ottoman Empire fell. they control tremendous amounts of property. One thing I'm reading, I started my course this week in the American Revolution. One of the things that I found really interesting was that the Pope declared that since these people were infidels, that we could take their land without worrying about it. They're infidels, they're not Christians. Just be sure you don't take land that belongs to a Christian prince or a country that we know. And so he gave them the okay to take all the Native American lands in North America and gave it away, just like it was his to give. I mean, the Pope actually gave Brazil to the Portuguese and everything else to the Spanish. So there's a lot going on in these land acquisitions, probably not as early as we're talking at the beginning, but it's going to, religion's going to play a part in a big way. So. And
So
also
what-
in 1557, one other thing, in 1557, the Pope put out a papal bull that declared these people were human and that they could be reached with the gospel because they were human. So they had to be declared human. I mean, go ahead.
So one thing I noticed is in the China discussion, they were referring, and I can't remember which one of the dynasties actually came up with the pictographs on Chinese,
Yes.
but in our book, they're always referring to Chinese as a language. There isn't a Chinese language.
No,
I mean, there's Mandarin, there's Hunan, if I remember right, I think there's 3 different main languages in China.
yeah. And those pictograms, if a kid had an ABC book like we think of, it would have had 10,000 characters in them. So their ABCs would have been 10,000 characters long. So
Am I assuming all Chinese languages then are basically evolved from that particular group of pictures, basically, for lack of a better word?
pretty much, yeah. If you've ever seen anybody explain one of those pictograms, it makes common sense. I mean, it's very complicated, but it makes good sense that this pictogram, the picture you're looking at, and then they'll explain what the picture is. And it says this pictogram represents this idea, or it's pretty much not a alphabet. It's a symbol.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, linguistics is a fascinating study.
Yeah.
Really quite good. Okay, anybody else have a comment or continuation from that? It's really fascinating that the Chinese culture was pretty much closed door as far as people getting in and out. And sometime during the Roman period, the Chinese built 300 ships and went exploring, and probably touched on the western coast of North America. But they went all the way to Rome, and there are records from both the Romans and the Chinese of their meeting, and the Chinese were not impressed that the Romans thought that humans could rule themselves. And they went as far as Africa, didn't find anything they wanted, turned around, went home, burned their ships, and closed their doors. And so there wasn't a lot of interplay until the 1800s, when the British came and knocked on the door and said, we want to trade this and we don't need your Walmart junk. So they got them addicted to opium, and so they'd have a market for opium with the Chinese. And of course the opium wars came from that. So
Was that Navy when China tried to invade Japan and you had the kamikaze winds or whatever?
yes,
When-
and what's really amazing, the Japanese defeated Russia twice, as late as 1866 and early 1900s, 1906 or something.
1904, I think it
Yeah.
was, but it doesn't matter.
But amazing that they had that much power. The Japanese were a very strong kingdom, and their history is really fascinating. They are different than any other Asian group. And it's funny because I've been in so many Asian countries and worked with so many Asian people. They're so different to me. Every one of them is totally different. Hello, Andrew. we've talked about papers. So if you have a paper problem, drop your question on us and we'll do that. We're talking about the history a little bit now, but the Chinese history, even with religion, is so different than the rest of the world, actually. It's funny when we talk about Western civilization, which is kind of the focus of this course with a few other things brought in, we're denying most of the world. We don't talk about Asian history or, the Indian history. All these people have thousands and thousands of years on us as the West that we don't even consider usually, which is a shame because there's some great history there.
I'm shocked about what I don't know about world history, to be honest. I'm missing a lot.
Well, that would be a good thing. You get to fill in a lot of gaps, reading a lot. I've taught all 4 histories, American 2 parts and European, that you really learn just tons of things. I was amazed last term with my colonial American history class, things that I thought I knew that I didn't know. There are lots of things to read and to grow with. So yeah, that's what makes history fascinating. I think it's the little things that we don't think about that when we find them, it's like finding treasure.
Yeah, I think I mostly got the American and European accounts of history. I don't think I really got. I learned a little bit about ancient Egypt on my own. I was homeschooled, so I definitely learned some of that on my own. But other than that, I think I don't know anything about India or China. Or I'm starting to now, but
Well, one of the interesting things about Buddhism was that Buddhism was an Indian religion, and the Chinese sent priests to India to bring Buddhism back to China, and they converted it into Chinese form of Buddhism. Probably one of the best courses I ever took was taught by a Chinese master teacher at Clemson, and he was from Princeton. He taught Chinese language at the school, and then he taught philosophy. But I had a class on Buddhism that was absolutely life transforming, and he was such a good teacher. He taught in the old ancient Chinese way, which made it really unique. You learned so much from him. It was just amazing.
I started practicing Buddhism recently, and I see a Theravada monk, and that's the original Indian Buddhism.
Yes.
So that's part of the reason I wanted to choose the Mauryan Empire.
Yeah.
Actually.
Good. Wonderful. Yeah. Always research things you're interested in. This paper is not meant to be a bore. It's meant to be an opportunity. That's why I give you pretty large latitudes to develop your own work. So it's something you're interested in, you'll work harder on it. I particularly like the Buddhist idea of the middle way, stay out of the ditch on both sides of the road.
Moderation.
Yes, moderation in everything, Anyone else have a comment? Yeah, is this meeting still worthwhile for you? That's the other question. I'm glad to do these every week if they bring some value.
I think it is for me, and I think at the end of this week, I'm going to have a much. There's going to be some more questions coming in as you kind of concentrate more on what you actually are trying to do.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know about the rest of the people. I kind of didn't have a whole lot of time at the beginning of the week to start writing on the paper, and now it's open. My schedule's opened up.
And it is a little bit of a turn and burn. In 8 weeks, we're doing an 18-week class in 8 weeks. So
it's the nature. It's the nature of the school that it's get in, get out, and turn and burn.
True.
I'm already behind. I'm just gonna be honest. I haven't even started the reading for this week. That's why. I wanted to, but I had a late start because I joined your class on the Thursday, like the 6th, I think. So I had a late start, and then I have a health condition, and that made me farther behind. And then it's just been running behind.
I hate to tell you guys, my reading for this week is at like higher than my head. I've got it all stacked here for this course on the American Revolution, and I've got to take a quiz Sunday night and do my proposal for my paper first weekend. So I feel your pain. Andrew mentioned the ideas of technology and the Chinese and how fascinating that is. I find that fascinating as well. They're very, very astute at making things work, water and all kinds of things. We'll also talk about the technology of the Romans, which is phenomenal. I think I sent you guys an article. I don't know if you got to read it or not, about the what they discovered about the concrete with the Roman resealing itself when it cracks. Did anybody read that article?
I definitely did. I read it before you put it out, but I was about to send it to you.
But it was fascinating.
I read it.
That when there's a crack, I mean, that's why the roads are still there and the aqueducts are still working, is when there's a crack develops, when it gets wet again, it reseals itself. And I saw a picture this week of one of the domes in Rome that they built, and it's still there. It's the largest concrete dome in the world, and it's hundreds of years old, and didn't have a crack in it because of that very process. And I'm thinking that technology could certainly help us in lots of ways, in bridge building and road building. So hopefully it will trickle down to somebody. But yeah, I mean, those kind of things fascinating. Andrew, I enjoy the history of science and technology. That's one of my favorite studies.
Yeah, I was going to say to kind of touch back on what I was saying. Sorry, I was having to type before. But I find it really, I think it was the Chinese, if I remember correctly. Basically, they made a cart that not only both measured distance, but also pointed to a specific, I can't remember if it pointed to a specific city or if it just pointed in a direction, but basically what it was is that as they're pulling this cart, it would drop marbles to measure distance. And then there would be a figure on the top with their finger pointing. And no matter which way you turned, that figure would always point in the same direction.
Wow.
I can't remember exactly what that was called, but I'm like 95% positive it was the Chinese who did it.
Well, you know, the Chinese developed the first self-moving automobile. It went like 3 miles an hour, but it was chain driven. And they literally developed the chain driven kind of a transmission kind of a deal. And that's like 1353 or something. So they're brilliant people. I mean, we're in the West. I think I mentioned this before. In the West, we're master thieves. We don't create much, but we steal some great stuff, and we adopt it and adapt it. That's the process. We took gunpowder from the Chinese. They used it for medicine. They used it for fireworks. We've developed, weaponry. We took the printing press from the Chinese, and in 1500s, Gutenberg invented movable type, which made it much more useful. So that's kind of been our history, adopting and adapting technology. But theirs has been to invent some really great stuff. Go ahead.
I was going to say, on that note, it kind of sounds like kind of what I did for my discussion post last week regarding like the Egyptians versus the Chinese and how they were developing, right? The early civilizations in a lot of the Asiatic areas was, yes, they form around a river, but that river's not very predictable. Their environment is a lot more mountainous. They had a lot more challenges that they had to develop unique solutions to, whereas civilizations developing around the Mediterranean, the Nile, and things like that had a lot more predictability, and it was just a little bit that there was not as much of a drive to develop unique technological solutions to their problems.
Very, very useful stuff, but not necessarily, like we developed technology just for technology's sake. The Chinese, all their rivers ran east to west or west to east, and they built the Grand Canal very early to move goods north to south. And the Grand Canal is almost probably one of the wonders of the world that they could do that at the time they did it. Of course, they operated with huge amounts of manpower, like building the Great Wall. There are thousands of people buried in the Great Wall that died building it. So there's a lot of things like that. But when you have human, I mean, same thing with the Egyptians. When you have human labor, you don't need technology so much. You can do it with just raw manpower, and they did that. I'm sure they had some technology in Egypt. And to be honest with you, we really don't even know how they did this in Egypt. We don't know how they built the pyramids or these kind of things, but we guess at it and we make assumptions. But they just had massive amounts of slave labor that did it as well. Anyone else?
So along those same lines, I noticed in the reading this week, they were saying the Chinese invented paper in 500 BCE or whatever it was. But didn't the Romans and the Egyptians had those scrolls, and how is that different? How's a scroll different than paper?
The scrolls the Egyptians called it papyrus. They made theirs from reeds, and the Romans made theirs largely from leather.
Yep.
And they lasted a long time, but they weren't that versatile. I mean, you can imagine typing a letter on a leather scroll compared to a piece of actual paper. And the Chinese made it lighter, thinner, much more
So
useful.
they basically had a 9x11 sheet of legal paper, or whatever the equivalent of it was at that time.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then they had, their writing was all done with the picture words. So you had to have something that didn't absorb the ink to the point of not being able to read the words. So they had to figure out how to make it readable. And I mean, they kept massive records too. I mean, there are things that they have we don't even know they have inside, like some of those great old palaces. But they're very meticulous about their writing, the record keeping, even their writings about Buddhism or their Confucianism or whatever. I tell you, it's a really great study to study the different religions in China, because they're so different from Western religions that have a God figure or a holy book or whatever. Islam, the three great monotheistic religions, all come from the same root and have the same fundamentalist strand in them and everything else. You don't find that in Asian religions. You don't find fundamentalist Buddhist or Shintoist or Confucianism or Taoism, any of that. But it's much more a kind of a religion of the mind. And it's about thought processes and personal discipline. But there's not a God figure. I mean, you're not going to heaven. You're developing karma, whatever. So it's really enlightening to look at their religions and understand that and how they develop as a people. That's why I think probably the Chinese and the Japanese are some of the most unique people on the planet. Well, anyone else? Really glad to see you here tonight. If you have any problems with your paper, I am probably going to be on the move rest of the week. I have a death in the family, or pending death, let me put it that way. So I maybe have to go 5.5 hours for a funeral. So if you need something urgently, my phone number is on the site. You can text me, you can call me. And I don't mind a bit you're calling me. So as Owen found out, I do call, right? I do use the phone. So
Thank you so much.
okay, and you guys have a great week, and let's keep our interest up, keep moving, keep reading, keep working, and I think you'll be happy with the results. I tell you what I would kind of aim for if I were you is make this paper your writing sample, because you may need one if you do go to grad school. So paper like this would be a really good document to have as a writing sample. Always go back at the end and rework all the final feedback and make sure it's good. And if you want me to mark it up again, you can send it back to me after the class is over, and I can go through and do a final markup. So anyway that I can help you, please do that. Okay.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you
All
so
right.
much.
All right. We'll see you soon. Take care.
Have a good night.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.